And what I want to tell you is that what you're going to learn this weekend is that the Bible and the biblical worldview specifically, not only does it give the best explanation of why someone can be so evil like he was, that Larry Nassar is, but it also gives an explanation of what God has said and what God has done about that. And not only that, but how Rachel Denhollander can stand up with a kind of courage to face her accuser and to forgive him in front of everybody. This is what we want to understand. This is the depth of faith that we want to have. We don't want to be the superficial, toting the Bible as a prop kind of believer. The goal of this weekend is that we would be those who are engaged. We are fixing our eyes on the truth of God's word. We are being transformed by it, and we are using the word of God to look at the world, to analyze the world, and for God to tell us what the world is and what the world is about through his word. And so that's the goal of the Worldview weekend, okay? And so it's necessary for you. One of the things I want you to know, you're going to be stretched, okay? Not just in your understanding, but you're going to be stretched in your attention, and that is all on purpose, okay? And so I'm going to be very sensitive to the fact that, this is these are heavy. Some of the things that we're talking about are really heavy things, and that these chairs might be super uncomfortable, okay? I'm going to try to be sensitive to those things, but I want you to know that this can be one of the most profitable experiences of your life if you'll engage, if you'll think about what we're saying, okay? And in order to help you do that, I've got these notebooks, okay? And these notebooks have blanks, and the blanks will be on the board. So it's kind of meant to help you if you like. I don't know if some of you are really OCD and you don't like blanks left unfilled, right? And so that's what this is all about. It's like so you'll stay kind of connected, and then for you to take this home and actually continue to read through it and ponder it, and that's I think that'll be ultimately beneficial for you. Okay, but apart from this God-centered, biblically informed worldview that opens our eyes to what God has done, what God has invited us to, there is no transformation. There is no hope. I believe that, and I want you to believe that, not by way of just an altar call or an invitation. I want you to believe that at the core of who you are. And so there's this quote at the top of the first page by a guy named Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson says this. It says, in every action we take, we are doing one of two things. We are either helping to create a hell on earth or helping to bring down a foretaste of heaven. We are either contributing to the broken condition of this world or participating with God in transforming the world to reflect his righteousness. We are either advancing the rule of Satan or establishing the reign of God. So my invitation to you is just that you would be curious with me about what the Bible says about the world, about us. And for us to get a proper footing, we really need to understand the basics of what is a worldview. And so this is what session 1 is going to be about. What is a worldview? And so you've got this little pyramid on your sheet, and it's got 4 different levels. Now the foundational level or the base level is worldview, okay? And then you have beliefs, and then you have values, and then you have behavior. Everything that you do, if you want to know the root of it, you need to trace all the way down here to understand that you have certain beliefs, and you get those beliefs from somewhere, right? It's almost like you, in your mind, you have a bookshelf, and that bookshelf contains all of the wisdom that you've ever embraced. And when certain situations come up in your life, and you need to understand them, you pull a book off of that bookshelf and think, right? And as you think, your priorities are set. That's another word for values. And as your priorities are set, and this is a very quick process in our mind, as your priorities set, then you act. Now the problem is that some of us act, and if we're honest, it doesn't line up with the rest of it, okay? You need to know that I do that. Still a lot more than I'd like to, and so, but this is the way that God has wired us to operate. This is our operating system as human beings. And so if we want to understand our actions, or if we want to understand the actions of others, then we've got to understand their priorities and our priorities. We've got to understand their beliefs and our beliefs. And ultimately, we've got to dig down and understand what their worldview is and what our worldview is. Okay? And so let's get to a basic definition of the worldview. And this is what the blanks are going to look like on your sheet. Okay? So the underlined and bolded print words are the blanks that you can fill in. And I put them all up here at one time. The last time I did this, I would click and they'd come in and people were like, I didn't get that blank. And it was a very traumatic experience for Elizabeth Witt. And so anyway, we'll try to, so that way you can have these, but we'll just walk through this, okay? And so what is a worldview? A worldview is a set of convictions or principles or beliefs about how reality functions and how we should live. How reality functions and how we should live. Or the dictionary defines a worldview as the overall perspective from which one sees and interprets the world, or a collection of beliefs about life and the universe held by an individual or group. A guy named Francis Schaeffer, who was a great Christian thinker of the last century, he said this. He said, the Christian worldview, based on the Word of God alone, is not just a good philosophy, it is the best philosophy. It is the only philosophy that is consistent to itself and answers the questions of life. It deals with life's problems and gives us answers. Every other worldview that we're going to talk about over the next tonight and tomorrow morning, every other worldview has contradictions. Every other worldview has inconsistencies, places where they'll say one thing, but they really believe another thing, or they'll do one thing, but that doesn't line up with what they've said in the past. Only the biblical worldview is consistent from start to finish. And so that's what we want to understand, is this idea of the biblical worldview. And so my dad was supposed to bring it, but how many of y'all have ever played around with one of these virtual reality headsets? Where you take your phone and you put it in there, and then you've never done that? Okay. My dad's going to bring one tonight, and you'll get to, I'll let you mess around with it. But you can, YouTube has this whole, playlist of 360-degree videos where you can, dive with sharks, It's pretty cool. You can do it later. But if you want to understand what a worldview is, think about that virtual reality headset. Okay? And if you want to understand especially what a faulty worldview is, think about that virtual reality headset. Because, what you do is you take your phone, you slide it in there, you put it on, and you turn the video on, right? There's a little button you press, and it turns the video on. Well, as you do that, are you looking at the real world, or are you looking at something that's not real? I mean, just in terms of where you actually are. Is it real or not real? It's not real, right? It's not real. And so, but if you operate like it's real and you try to get behind the wheel of a car and drive somewhere in your little virtual reality world, what's going to happen? Is it going to be good or bad? It's going to be bad, right? You're going to end up through the window at Ace Hardware or something. You're not going to get very far. Or if you want to walk down the road wearing one of those things, you're going to walk out in the middle of the street and get hit by a car. I mean, when you try to operate with a flawed or fake view of the world, bad things happen. Now, the biblical worldview is kind of like Zach's glasses, or Gracie's glasses, or Madeline's glasses, or anybody else has glasses or contacts, right? I meant to bring a pair of my old glasses. Because if you put on a pair of my old glasses, everything will look distorted, right? But the thing about glasses is, if your vision is distorted, and you take them and put them on, what happens? You see, yeah, I mean... And not only can you see, but the goal of it is that you see clearly. And seeing clearly is a very helpful thing, right? Because otherwise, I might go and hug somebody other than my wife. I mean, that's not a good thing, right? Not a good thing at all. Because I've got really bad vision, okay? I mean, everything's blurry. And so the fact is that those corrective lenses, like they're called, if you look on your driver's license, those corrective lenses, they give you a clear view of the world. That's what the biblical worldview does. Every other worldview is like the virtual reality headset. It may be fun for a while. It may look cool for a while. But the fact is if you try to operate in real life with that distorted worldview, you're going to end up hurting yourself and maybe even hurting others. And so one of the things that we need to understand about worldviews is that worldviews, they're all, one of the main purposes is for them to answer certain questions. And so, and Chuck Colson, the guy that I mentioned earlier, he says this. He says, our major task in life is to discover what is true and to live in step with that truth. As we saw earlier, every worldview can be analyzed by the way it answers three basic questions. Where do we come from? And who are we? That's called creation. What has gone wrong with the world? That's called the fall. And what we can do to fix it? And that's called redemption. Okay? And so, if we want to understand what people believe at the root of who they are, we need to understand this idea of these questions that worldviews answer. And so all worldviews can be, you can kind of diagnose worldviews by asking questions about how they answer these questions. First of all, the question of origin. Where did everything come from? Secondly, the question of meaning. Why does life exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? Third, morality. How should we live? Fourth is destiny. What happens when we die? And the fifth is identity. Who am I? And why am I here? The question of purpose. There's a guy named Abdu Murray, and he says all major worldviews are designed really to answer a single question. If you want to reduce it down even more, just to answer a single question. Worldviews ask different questions, but they're really seeking to answer one. It is our job to figure out what one question a worldview is trying to answer. So essentially, a worldview is a set of ideas that seek to answer a set of questions. So here's how we're going to analyze and understand the worldviews of the world. First of all, we're going to talk about worldviews in terms of ideas, how they answer these questions. And you need to know two things. Ideas have consequences, and ideas have champions. Ideas have consequences, and ideas have champions. Okay? Ideas have consequences, and ideas have champions. Now, you see it says diagram 2.2 there. We're going to skip over that. We're going to go straight to this first worldview that is one of the most common in the world today. It's called naturalism. Naturalism. Chuck Colson says that naturalism is the idea that nature is all that exists, and that life arose from a chance collision of atoms, evolving eventually into human life as we know it today. And just because, okay, I'm going to show you one pop cultural reference to this. All right. What's that called? Yeah, it's The Simpsons. But yeah, it's that process is called evolution, right? Evolution. And so now, naturalism is the core worldview of evolution. Evolution is not a worldview in itself. Evolution, actually, if you want to get real technical with it, is a belief. Okay? Evolution is a belief. It's never been proven. We've never seen it in action. We've seen small forms of evolution. We call those adaptation, micro-adaptation. And one primary example of that's probably one of the easiest to see is the different skin colors of people in the world, right? There's one race of people, it's called the human race, okay? But then there are different levels of melanin, which actually makes our skin different colors. And who wants to guess how those different skin colors came to be? The Tower of Babel. Well, that was where the languages came to be. But after the Tower of Babel, they spread out across the earth, right? And some went farther away from the equator, and those are the white folks, right? No kidding. They're farther away from the sun, and so they don't need the protection of the darker skin. But those who stayed near to the equator, their skin color adapted to the heat, to the sunlight, and their skin was darker. Did you ever know that? Right? That is microevolution. But we know macroevolution says that you have these Homer Simpson, portrayal of the species jumps, but it's all based on naturalism. And naturalism says everything is natural, nothing is supernatural. Everything is physical, nothing is metaphysical. When you think about metaphysical, just think about above. Meta is above. So meta being above the physical realm. Everything is earthly in one sense. Nothing is above the earth. And we said ideas have consequences. Ideas also have champions. Let's deal with the champions first. The champion of evolution is Charles Darwin. He is the champion of the naturalist perspective. He's the one who really advanced this idea of naturalism through evolution, right? And it's the theory of evolution is a vital component for naturalism because it takes the creator out of the equation of creation. If evolution's true, right, macroevolution, if evolution's true, you don't have to have a God, right? Because you don't have to have a creator. If evolution is true in the way it's believed at this point in time. And so evolution in Charles Darwin's day became effectively a way to replace God in the modern worldview of the time. And so this idea that everything is natural, nothing is supernatural, those ideas have had consequences. Those ideas had consequences. So in morality, naturalism leads to something called relativism. If nature is all that's there, then there's no objective source of moral truth, and we're all left to make up our own set of rules. That's what relativism is. We're all left to make up our own set of rules. Now, many people would like to live this way, and many people would espouse that they're their own authority in this way. But the fact is that try telling that to the police when they pull you over for speeding. Well, that's the speed I felt like going, right? Well, there's this thing called a speed limit. That speed limit is a rule placed on you, right? And so naturalism, though, one of the consequences of it, if there is no God, there is no objective standard, I can do whatever I want. And that's one of the consequences of evolution. Of naturalism. Another one is the fact that another consequence of naturalism is that that people get settled and then it's passed on in this view of atheism. Right? God is not needed. Now, atheism literally means no God. Right? Theism. Theism. Theos is the Greek word for God. Is the negation of that. And so, basically, no God. But the thing is that if anybody ever tells you that they're an atheist, ask them what that means. And when they tell you that means they don't believe that there's a God, ask them if they can prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. And they'll say no, that they can't prove that. And they'll probably argue with you along the way. But the fact is that the reason they can't prove that is because the human mind is limited. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the human mind is limited, and we can't know everything. And so if you can't prove something, then you can't really be settled in the belief of atheism. Most atheists are actually what's called agnostics. Agnostics don't believe that they can know there's a God, that God is unknowable. But naturalism naturally leads to atheism. Atheism really, it's kind of a circle. Atheism leads to naturalism. Naturalism leads to atheism. And that's one of the prominent worldviews of our day. Another one, big word called Transcendentalism. Transcendentalism has nothing to do with being a dentist, okay? It has everything to do with this idea of transcending, okay? Now this is... I'll help you understand this in a minute. So just get through this slide, and I'll really bring it home for you, because this is a very one of the most popular concepts of our day, along with naturalism. Transcendentalism. That means that reality transcends the physical world. It means that everything physical and supernatural, that everything's made up of the same stuff, right? It's funny, we actually had some Christian musicians drift into Transcendentalism several years ago. And there was a band, they had some really awesome songs, and then they started singing about Brother Moon, and they had an album that came out called I Am Mountain, and they were like basically saying that like everything had the same stuff, it was made up of the same stuff, like God's in me, God's in you. It was very weird. Their lyrics to their songs went just really weird, and it's like, that just doesn't sound right, you know? And the whole thing is, in Transcendentalism, there is no personal God. But instead, everything is God. And God is in everything and everyone. And this is what they say, that there is no God out there, but only the God within you. Only the God within you. And so, the champion of this idea was actually one of the champions of this idea was actually in Abbeville earlier this week. Anybody know? Oprah! That's right. Oprah. This idea that God is in you, Oprah championed this idea. But then you see that other name up there, George Lucas. What's George Lucas known for? The Force. Right? We've already had one. This is our second Star Wars reference, right? Somebody explain to me the idea about the Force. Any Star Wars folks in here? Okay, so...
The Force is this like power being inside of like every object and every person.
Yeah.
That supposedly like Jedis can like connect with and control.
Aha! It's in everything, right? And the whole purpose is to connect with that power that's in everything, and so it brings this unity, right? And in the Force, you have the dark side of the Force, right? Kind of this yin and yang. You've ever seen that yin and yang? That's the whole idea that comes from this transcendental understanding of the world, this worldview, right? And so George Lucas really popularized the idea of transcendentalism. And the entirety of the Star Wars saga, it comes from this transcendental worldview. It makes for a great story, right? But when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of looking at life, the consequences of this worldview, they don't work. The solutions are not found outside of us, but the solutions are found inside of us. Just look deep within your heart. Even Christians begin to just talk like this sometimes. Just listen. You're awesome within yourself. Just connect with that, right? I mean, we all smile and we feel good, and it's good, right? And then you have to like go deal with life. You're like, wait, the problem is actually in here. Like, I'm not feeling it anymore. I felt it when I was over there, not anymore. Yeah. And so transcendentalism doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. It also says that the main cause of our suffering is our own ignorance of our divine nature. I actually, when I was in Hollywood, California one time, I went to the Church of Scientology's Celebrity Center. The Church of Scientology, Transcendental Worldview, okay? And so, basically, this Celebrity Center, these people go and they pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the Scientology people claim to basically deal with their inner spirit, which they call the Thetan, all right? That's not Satan with a lisp, that's Thetan, okay? Thetan. It's kind of funny to say. Thetan, Thetan. And I'm just thinking of a guy, Thetan. Thetan with talking to Jesus. No, anyway, okay, so anyway. This is the problem. I gotta get sidetracked. But anyway, so the whole thing is they give you they feed you a certain diet and you drink this liquid, and it's all supposed to help you connect with the spiritual part of who you are. And they make you do all these exercises, not like physical exercises, but mental exercises, so that you can understand about how the divine is within you, right? And it's just like, they even have this, I forget what it's called, but it's this little meter thing that you hold these two little metal rods, and they ask you these questions, and like, as the little meter thing, like, the little needle on the meter moves up and down, like the person who's reading it is supposed to be able to tell things about you. But what was funny was, we had a tour guide as we were going through. What was funny was, if you squeezed it a little bit, the needle would go crazy. And so she would ask me a question, I'd squeeze it, and she'd be like, ooh. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. But here's one that maybe you've seen. Animals, humans, and trees have the same value. Because we're all made of the same stuff, right? Right? So what are some organizations or movements in our day and age that would really connect with this? PETA? Right? I mean, I heard today that I think it was PETA, they were basically saying that people who went fishing, that they were torturing these fish. And they're like, I mean, we need to help people connect with the fact that these fish have feelings, and that when you're hooking them in the mouth, it's hurting them, guys. And so you know what they started calling them? Sea kittens.
Oh my God.
They're like, I mean, you and your family wouldn't go out on the weekend and just say, let's go torture some cats. And they're like, no, we need to adopt sea kittens. I mean, this was a whole campaign of PETA. Another one I meant to get the video clip. It's this woman from Greenpeace, right? It's this organization. It's like Save the Trees, right? And they were tearing out. Which they hated around here, but like they cut these trees down, and these people would go and they chain themselves to these trees, so that they couldn't cut them down. And the people they had another group that would go to trees that had already been cut down, and they were designated to weep and wail over the tree. They're like, I'm here to mourn the loss of the old growth trees, and we want to tell you we love you, trees. Oh, and, I mean, she's like screaming. It's hilarious. Just if you have access to YouTube, woman crying over trees, it's worth your time. But where does that come from? What would take you from like sitting at home one day, reading a magazine or watching a TV show and be like, I want to go chain myself to a tree? Like, what would lead you to do that? A worldview that says those trees are as valuable as we are. Right? It's just kind of crazy. A little overboard. But then this next worldview is called Theism. Naturalism builds on its system. It builds its system on the assumption that the material universe is all that exists. Transcendentalism assumes that all reality is one great mind or spirit. But theism begins with the assumption that God exists. Theos being the Greek word for God. And so it all begins with God. God exists. Okay? Now there are subdivisions to theism, right? Polytheism means many gods. The word poly means many gods. Monotheism means one God. And basically, this idea of monotheism, if we want to take it a step further, it means that if you claim to be a theist, if you claim to be a monotheist, then you're saying, I believe that there's a personal God and all the questions are answered by Him. All the questions are answered by Him. That humanity and the universe are created by and supervised by God, who has revealed Himself to humanity. Revealed Himself to humanity. It's all about revelation. Worldviews like Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all root their understanding of the world in this idea of revelation. God has spoken. And because God has spoken, we know about the world. And so if we want to break it down even further, you have theism, right? Hey, buddy. Come on in. Good to see y'all. You have theism, and then you have monotheism, and then you have the Christian biblical worldview. Let me pause. And then here you go. It's empty. I was going to tell you all that the paper disappeared if you were running your head enough, but that would be me. Lying. I don't want to do that. And so in the break, we'll fill in the blanks on y'all's that y'all missed, okay? So we're, can y'all tell them what page we're on?
We don't have pages.
Third page, page 3. Yeah, I meant to put page numbers on there. Sorry.
Wait, we're on page 4.
4. We're on page 4.
On the last page.
Last page. Last page of lesson 1. Okay. So we're talking about the Christian biblical worldview. Christian biblical worldview, okay? This is what the Christ-centered biblical worldview says. It says that humanity and the universe are created by and supervised by God, who has revealed himself to humanity through his creation. Chuck Colson says this. He says, in every area of life, genuine knowledge means discerning the laws and ordinances by which God has structured creation and then allowing those laws to shape the way we should live. This is what it means to, just people saying, do you believe the Bible? Yes, I believe the Bible. Well, what does that mean? This is what it means. It means that God has ordained every area of life to be governed by specific laws or commands, different information, different knowledge and insight, and he has spoken those things to us. And so we submit to that, and it shapes the way that we live. It shapes the way that we live. And the fact is that the biblical worldview best explains the existence of the world, it best explains the problems of the world, and it best explains the solutions to those problems. Like I said, it's the most consistent. But the fact is that we don't live in a world or even in a country that automatically espouses the biblical worldview. That's not where we are. And so that really leads us to say, okay, we know about naturalism and evolution. We know about transcendentalism and the way that kind of fleshes itself out. We see about theism, and we're going to spend the rest of our time together talking about this biblical worldview. But what do people believe today? The people that you are around when you're working or when you're out at the mall, or the people who live in your neighborhood, what do they believe? What if we had to just categorize or generalize what the average American, maybe even take it a step further and say the average American teenager, what they believe, what would it be called? Well, there's a guy named Christian Smith who wrote a book called Soul Searching. And it was all based on exploring the spiritual lives of the American teenager. Right? And this was written like 11 years ago, so I'm sure it's really actually changed since then. But he came up with a title to describe the average teenager's worldview. And even the average Christian teenager, they didn't have a biblical worldview. They had something called moral therapeutic deism. Moral therapeutic deism. Now, deism means that they believe in God, but that God and the truths that God had spoken were all meant to do two things. First of all, make them moral. That's where the moral comes into play. And then secondly, therapy to make them feel good. So if any truth doesn't make me feel good, then it can't be true. And that even the things like the main goal of God is just to make me a moral person. Like that I don't get in trouble with my parents. Like that's really God's goal. That encapsulated the life of the American, or the worldview of the American teenager, moral therapeutic deism. But if we wanted to even take it, look and just take it to 2018 now, then we would kind of analyze the core values of our worldview, the American worldview today. The origin of the world, where did the world come from? What explains it? Science, right? Science, which was what we would holler the other day when we were doing a science experiment. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, y'all hollered it with me a little bit, too. Science, right? Yeah, science. Science, here's what's funny. If anybody ever wants to make a point, especially adults, kind of open y'all's eyes to what adults do. We're silly sometimes. We won't know something's true, but we'll say that there was like a survey done or some kind of scientific study done to like add weight that like, oh, well, it must be true. I mean, really, that's, if you ever say something, if you say that science has proven, right? Oh, yeah, true. But people don't think about that. They say, well, these scientists proved this, right? And the whole point is not to tell you something that's true. It's to make you think that it's true because some scientist said it somewhere, right? We have a worldview that is just enamored, really not enamored, that's probably the wrong word. It's just a worldview that believes, we worship at the altar of science thinking that science can prove everything. And then if a scientist said it, it must be true because they're never wrong, right? And so that's how we explain the origin of the universe in the American Worldview today. What about meaning? What's the meaning of life? Define yourself. You define you. You be your own you. You be awesome. You be who you are. Nobody can tell you who you are. Nobody can tell you who you're not. It's up to you to define yourself. That's your meaning in life. Self-definition. All rooted in this individualistic perspective on life that the world revolves around little old me. Right? That's, once again, people wouldn't articulate that. They wouldn't tell you that that's what they believe. But here's the key. You may not always live what you profess, but you always live what you believe. So people may not tell you that they believe the world revolves around them, but if you look at the way they act, does it look like they think the world revolves around them? Come on in. Thank you. He's got the virtual reality headset. This is my dad, Tommy. Mr. Tommy. And so the whole idea of this individualism is that it's all about me. It's all about me. Then, so origin meaning morality. Morality. We already talked about relativism earlier. Okay, but then identity. Where does our identity come from? Well, this one we can break out a little bit more. Emotivism. Emotivism. Now you see the root word there, emotion, right? Which means feelings are first. Feelings are first. If you hurt my feelings, then what you say can't be true. Because my truth never hurts my feelings. That's how people operate today. Everything in this world should make me feel better about myself. It should make me feel good. And if it doesn't make me feel good, then it can't be true, right? Our identity is wrapped up in our feelings. But then there's this idea called pluralism. And the idea of pluralism basically says that the world's a better place when all of everybody's views just come together and we accept them just the way that they are, right? The only way we can find truth is through coming together and treating each other equally. Now, we should treat each other equally, absolutely. But not all perspectives are valid. Just recognize that there's still a YouTube channel I think they broadcast live 24 hours a day. They're called the Flat Earth Society. They still believe the Earth is flat, right? And so, would you believe that their views are true? I don't think so.
It's impossible without satellite.
Exactly. And so this idea of pluralism, it just doesn't, we should treat each other equally, but not all perspectives are valid. Not all perspectives are equal. And then this last one, we call it totalitolerance. I practiced that word. It's very hard. Totalitolerance. Everyone must be tolerant of everyone else's perspective, kind of like the pluralism idea, but just taking a step further. And this is the step further. The only time it's right to show intolerance is when someone is claiming that truth is exclusive, or claiming that a truth is exclusive, right? So you believe that marriage should be just between a man and a woman? That is so intolerant. But me, I'm all about tolerance, except with your perspective. That's where this comes into play. Totalitolerance, okay? That's where we get our identity from. Emotivism, pluralism, totalitolerance. And then finally, this idea of destiny. What happens when you die? The prominent thought process of the day is, death's bad, just don't think about it. Just don't think about it. And if you don't think about it, then everything will be good, it'll be fine. And that's the worldview of today. So, naturalism, transcendentalism, theism. Naturalism is associated with evolution and Charles Darwin. The removal of God from society, the removal of God from so many places. Transcendentalism, just think the force, right? The force. God is in you and in everything else, and it's your job just to connect with the spiritual reality of everything around you and to find a way to manage it and control it, and that's going to lead you to a better place. And then theism, which said that, okay, well, I don't know if that's right, but God has spoken, and that's where I find truth, is in what God has said. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about this Christian biblical or Christ-centered biblical worldview.